Thanks for tuning in. You're watching Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host Kyle Brotherson, and today we're talking about this 2019 Beta 390 RR Race Edition. Stick around. One thing that I always tell myself is that I can't go into a review with a preconceived idea or a preconceived notion. Now, I'm not perfect, and so this is hard to do. But I went into this bike with an open mind, and this thing did not disappoint. This thing delivered in a way that it's hard for me to describe. These videos tend to be pretty long, so I'm gonna give you a short synopsis of what I think about this bike. And then if you're interested, you can watch the whole longer review. Sorry, I've got a bunch of mosquitoes around here. This bike was absolutely incredible. And this is, to date, my favorite off-road four-stroke of all time. Subject to change down in the future because I could ride other bikes, but as of right now, if I'm gonna go out and buy a four-stroke off-road enduro racing bike, this would be at the top of my list. There's a few things this bike does incredibly well. First off, it's got an amazing front fork. The Sachs 48mm closed cartridge forks on this 2019 Beta 390 RR are the best forks that I have used on any dirt bike as far as stock forks, as far as absorbing bumps and chop and rocks and single track stuff. Those forks are unbeatable in my mind. The other thing is the motor delivers. It isn't like this high strung fire breathing dragon. It's got a lot of torque. It's all in the mid-range. There's not a ton of like pop off the bottom so it just like sets you on your butt, and there's not like like this raging, you know, fire up on the top of the RPM. It's all in the middle, and it's very it's just controllable, very controllable power. And then the other thing is the seat height is a little bit lower to the ground. And so if you're under 6 feet tall, this bike is gonna be make you feel very comfortable because you're a little bit lower down, and so it's easier to touch the ground. Those things alone make this a fantastic four-stroke to ride. And it really hasn't mattered where I took the bike, whether I was up in the mountains in single track or in two track, it ran phenomenal. Out in the desert, it did really great. I mean, the high speed stuff, it did fantastic. The slow speed stuff, it did really well. The only place I didn't really love it is in the super gnarly stuff. If it got really rocky, it is a four-stroke and it is harder to stay running. But this is actually the easiest, most mellow four-stroke that I've had as far as not stalling. And there's not a lot of engine braking on this thing either. So all in all, it's a fantastic package. Let me walk you kind of front to back through the bike and see what we can find. This is the race edition bike, and I think that the standard edition bikes get the same brakes, but we've got a Nissan brake up here in the front. This is a bike that is a brake that comes on a lot of different dirt bikes, Hondas and Yamahas and Betas, and it's a very good brake. Sometimes I don't feel like I have quite as much feel as maybe a Brembo brake, but it's a very good brake. And this front fork and front brake and everything combination felt really good to me. I never felt like I had a problem with it. They come with a Michelin Enduro tire on here. I took that off because I haven't had as good a luck with that, so I put something on that I was more comfortable with. And then also I ended up putting tubeless on this bike because I wanted to give it the best shot possible, and this did not deliver, or this did not disappoint. The front end of this bike, from the tire to the fork to the brakes, everything here was totally on point, and I had zero problems with any of that. As far as the clutch goes, they put a Brembo clutch on this thing, so there's absolutely no complaint here. It's buttery smooth. It's funny, you've got Nissan brake on this side and you've got a Brembo clutch over on here, which is kind of an interesting combination, but it works, and it works well. One of the other things, or a few of the other things that you get on these Betas, you get a headlight with a high beam and a low beam, and these things are basically wired up, ready to go street legal. Even though it's a race edition bike, it has a horn. I took the horn off this bike because the horn is over here on the side where normally where a dirt bike kill switch would be. This is where the horn is over here. So I actually took the horn off because that was frustrating to me. So over here, you've got a bunch of stuff on the controls. You've got a switch between high beam and low beam. You've got the horn, you've got the signal light option here, and you've also got a map switch between the full map and the more enduro map, or the rainy/muddy map over here. And it makes a little bit of a difference. It's not a huge difference, but it is a little bit noticeable. You've got a decent trip computer over here where you can do, you know, trip A, trip B. You can keep track of your hours. Although one thing I did notice is that something that was buggy to me is every once in a while you'd go to start the bike and it wouldn't start, and then it would reset your trip counter. So it's kind of like it would like do something funny with the electronics, and then it would reset the trip counter, which was really annoying. Your start and your stop are over here on the right thumb, so it's something that takes a little bit of getting used to. After you ride the bike for a little bit, it's not a big deal. And if this was your only bike, you'd get used to it. Because I'm riding 3 or 4 bikes at a time, it's harder for me to get used to the fact that my start and stop is over here. As you can see, Beta has followed everyone else's lead, which is to remove the Kickstarter. I shouldn't say they're following everyone else's lead. Everyone is in a race to the bottom on weight. And they've removed the Kickstarter on this, which I'm not a fan of. I feel like there's a lot of times when these bikes can be very hard to start with just the electric start, just because the batteries are small. And sometimes they don't turn the bikes over fast enough to start them. That's not to mention any type of a failure, which I've had before. This bike never failed to start for me, but it is a worry that I have, and I hate the fact that everyone is doing this and taking the backup Kickstarters off the bikes. Beta sends these things to you from the factory with a skid plate, which is nice, although it doesn't cover the linkage down here, which I wish it did. Although one thing is, this linkage doesn't hang down as low as most of the other linkages for the bikes that I've had. So if you're gonna have a linkage bike, this is a good one to have, because it doesn't hang down low to catch on so many of those things. And you can get a skid plate for this thing that will cover the linkage. So that's not necessarily that big of a deal. The foot pegs are great, although I do feel like I hit these foot pegs on rocks and roots more than my other bikes, and I don't know if it's because they're lower down to the ground or if it's just in my imagination. The shifter, I could use the shifter to come out a little bit further on this side, just to make it a little bit easier to get, especially on the upshifts. It feels like it's a little bit close to the peg, but it's not super terrible. The kickstand over here though, this kickstand has too small of a foot. There are so many times where I can't put this kickstand down because the bike will just sink right down into the ground. The foot needs to be a little bit bigger, Beta, to make this thing work better. It's not too difficult, but that foot needs, sorry, I keep swatting mosquitoes. That foot needs to be a little bit bigger so that this thing doesn't just sit down, just push right down into the ground. Whether it's clay or whether it's mud or whether it's all these things, this bike is just harder to stand up than almost any of the other bikes that I've had. I like the seat that Beta's got on here. It's a nice looking seat. They've even got a Pop-Tart holder up here for you. This is actually to hold a race card, and when the bike comes from the factory, it'll have a little race card with lap times in here. That race card gets destroyed the very first time you wash the bike. And then when you come into a corner, you're supposed to be sliding up here, and so you're sliding up onto this. So I'm not a fan of this, but the rest of the seat I am a fan of. And I'm a fan of how you can just take the seat off with a push button right there, which is really cool. You got to make sure that you push everything down just like that. Sorry, I don't want the bike to fall over. Just so that you can get everything to hook down. But so the seat is pretty cool. Also right here, these hand guards, oh man, I love this. You've got great handles right here to lift the bike around, which is super important for an enduro off-road bike. And these things don't hurt your hands, so I wish more of the manufacturers would do this. This is A+ right here. I love the handles. The fuel tank, I don't think it's quite big enough. I think it's a 2-gallon tank. And I have been on one of the first longer rides I took this on. I was with a bunch of guys on 2-strokes, and we did some pretty fun, fast and flowy, and then a little bit technical single track. And we did about 56 miles, and this bike ran out of gas right near the trucks. Whereas all the other guys were on 2-strokes, and they had 2.6-gallon tanks. And this bike was the only bike that was out of gas. So it doesn't get super great mileage, and the tank I don't think is big enough. I think Beta should have gone a little bit bigger, so you'll have to be careful with that on your rides. You may need to pack some gas because it's not that big of a fuel tank. Beta puts nice parts on this bike. You can see in your sprocket here, you've got a dual compound sprocket where you've got the steel on the outer ring, and then you've got aluminum on the inner ring. They put nice hubs on these things. It's nice rims. Everything is nice all the way around. There is a chain guard on the top, which a lot of people said was going to break off. I haven't broken that off yet. Again, it had Michelin Enduro tires on the back. I went ahead and changed this tire over to an IRC VE33S because that's an amazing tire. And then I went tubeless on the rear of this bike as well, just because I love the way that works. And so I had great traction. The rear shock was fantastic on this thing. Sorry, I got a bike that is just ripping up and down the road, a little YZ65, I think it is. But yeah, there were no problems with my rear end on this bike. You do have your tail light back here, and these, I'm not a huge fan of these extended fender things back here, because a lot of times what happens is this just breaks when you wheelie the thing over, but I was careful enough, I haven't wheelied the bike over yet, so I haven't broken that off. Something interesting is Beta puts on a bigger rear brake rotor than a lot of the other providers. This thing ends up being larger in diameter by about 1 inch to all my other bikes. What that does is it makes it easier to hit this rear disc. And I was trying to be careful with this bike and not take it in super technical places, and I still bent the rear brake rotor. So then I had to put this Bulletproof Designs rear disc guard on here, which Beta sent to me. Which was really awesome. Thank you for doing that. So they sent me a new brake rotor by Galfer, really common brake rotor on a lot of these bikes, but this is a bigger one. And then they sent me the rear disc guard because I was bending that. And this is something that you'll have to pay attention to, because if you have one of these bikes, these are easier to hit than most of the other bikes out there. So you'll need a rear disc guard. We've got Nissan rear brakes on the back of this bike, and we've got a very small little brake pedal over here. Now I've bent this brake pedal so it even looks a little bit more narrow, but I would like this thing to be a little bit further forward, a little bit extend further out from the peg, and then just come out a little bit more. Now that's a controversial topic because they're keeping it tight in so it doesn't get bent, but I just want a little bit bigger brake pedal, and I want it to be extended a little bit further out away from my peg. But it's serviceable and it hasn't given me any problems. You do have separate sides here for your engine oil and your transmission oil, which I think is a great thing, because that way your service intervals can be further apart. One of the problems with a lot of 4-strokes is you're servicing the engine oil and the transmission oil like every 5 to 10 hours. This one, your first engine oil change and transmission oil change is after 3 hours. And then after that, they want you to do it every 30 hours, which is awesome. Thank you for doing that, Beta. And I think it's because you've split the, the oil system. So you've got one for engine oil, one for transmission oil. They're not mixing together, and so it isn't as important to change them all the time. So that was a really cool thing that Beta did. None of the graphics are injection molded, which means that they're just stickers or vinyl stickers on the top of the plastic. And right here, this sticker that used to be right here, this peeled away within the first 3 or 4 minutes of me riding, because my boot peeled that off. And I've seen other bikes just like this where that has happened too, and this will start to peel, because these things could be injection molded on here, and that would make them stay a little bit longer. Overall, I haven't had any of the other graphics peeling, but I do think that we will get some of that, because that's an indication right here that some of you guys might have that problem. You may have graphics coming off. They did a pretty nice job on the gearing. It's got a 6-speed gearbox, and it is kind of a wide ratio transmission. First gear is pretty low, but it's not like crazy low. And then you catch up to it in second and third gear, and it's pretty good. I didn't have any problems there. I thought they did a nice job with all of that. The motor, again, is a very strong point on this bike. It's very easy to ride, it's very forgiving, and it's my favorite 4-stroke motor to date. The motor has very little engine braking, and so overall, it just makes this bike feel very balanced. The chassis is super planted, and whether you're going through whoops or single track, this thing just kind of stays right in course. The front wheel doesn't deflect because the forks are amazing. And so there's just so many, this bike just gives me confidence. And I think that's probably the biggest and the best thing that I can say about this bike is it makes me want to ride more. This bike makes me want to get out and ride it. It makes me want to ride dirt bikes more. It makes me want to ride it more because it does so many of those things so well. You get such great traction. You can pop the wheel up. But this bike is super fun to ride. It is just like, there's nothing here that's a big deal breaker on this. I think that they did so many things right on this bike. It's got a huge exhaust, a huge spark arrestor back here, which is kind of obnoxious just for some people to look at. A lot of people said they didn't like the way that looked. But overall, I think they got the styling on the bike very on point. This thing is really nice. It even comes stock with some handguards. They're flag style handguards, and they're flimsy enough that I think that they'll last for a little while without breaking. But it's nice that they give us that. The headlight is serviceable to ride at night with the high beam and the low beam. You can ride this thing at night. You don't have to have an aftermarket headlight, although I would advise that, or at least like a light on the top of your helmet would be really helpful for that. So Anyway, 2 thumbs up for me on this bike. This bike, who would have thought that I would like the 4-stroke version of the Beta better than the 2-stroke version? Now, the 2-stroke version I did a couple years ago was just a standard edition. For me and my money and the things that I like right now, I'm gonna be wanting to get the race edition on any of the Beta bikes that I get. But the whole thing with Beta is rideability. Their tagline is rideability. They don't want this thing to be just like a fire-breathing dragon out of the box. They want this to be rideable for the general public, and I think they've hit a very good balance with that. I think this bike is something that can give a lot of people a lot of confidence with the lower seat height, with the motor that just, it's just torquey, and it isn't gonna bite your head off down in the lower RPMs. So I think this bike is a fantastic, fantastic bike. That's pretty much it, guys. If you like these videos, please remember to like the videos, subscribe to my channel. You can use the links down in the description. You can go over to Patreon and support me that way. This is how I'm supporting my family now, guys. So without your support, this is not possible. And I also want to thank Beta for lending this bike to me. Beta let me use this bike for 3 months, and I'm so happy they did, because this thing is amazing. And if any of the other manufacturers out there want to follow suit with what Beta did and allow me to test one of these bikes without paying $10,000 for it, it would be very, very nice. Cool thing about this is then Beta can go sell this to the dealer as a used bike, and so Beta doesn't lose any money, I don't lose any money, the dealer gets to sell a used bike, and everyone wins. So it was a really fantastic experience all the way around. Beta is a fantastic company to work with. I had no problem getting parts for this bike. More and more parts are coming online with Rocky Mountain ATV and all these different places, and it's a quality bike. So I mean, you might break some levers and stuff every now and again, but these bikes are built well, and I have no problem with recommending this bike to anyone. That's my last word on this sucker. Thanks for watching, guys.